What's up, guys? I dropped out of college. I was kicked out of my house. I'm a United States veteran, and now I do ads. So that's a great introduction, kind of what I do. It's a lot of crazy stuff, and I'm here to share it with you guys. So my name is Merrick Hoffman, and I'm just excited to where I'm at right now. I don't think it's crazy, I'm making 30K, and hopefully I can start surpassing that, right? And I'm making record months right now, and I couldn't be more glad. So this is so weird for me to talk about, but I think this is all linked back to high school. I'm not gonna lie. So in high school, I grew up taking AP classes. I had to do a whole bunch of homework. I always got good grades, always studied, and I'm actually glad I did that. Even though I never did anything with it, I'm still glad I did AP classes. And because it made me have a lot of homework, and every single day I would spend 3-4 hours studying. All right, just pure studying or doing homework, and I was just always like that ever since like 8th grade, 12th, right? For 4 or 5 years, I did that. And basically, I'm glad I did. It created a system in my mind where every single day I spent studying, sitting at a table, doing something, right? I think it built some type of routine for me in my head that I always have to be doing something, studying or planning something. And I think that's the reason why I ended up getting into social media. So while I was in high school, I remember at the age of 16, I went to my dad's office, because he was working from home, and I walk inside it, and I'm like, Dad, and I'm like, I'm 16, your 16th birthday is supposed to be the biggest birthday, right? And I remember he said 3 words, and that kind of changed my standpoint of, of growing up. And he said, get a job. And then I was like, wow. I'm 16, right? That's the legal age for you to get a job, right? So I was doing wrestling, I was taking AP classes, and I had to get a job. So that took me by surprise, right? And my dad, he raised me to be very independent, and I couldn't be more thankful for that, because that's the reason why I could do everything by myself. I'm not codependent. And that created that awesome mentality in my head. So I remember I applied to this Wendy's. It was about 3 miles away from me, and I'm like, okay, it's the closest job, because I lived out kind of middle of nowhere, low-key, and I had to figure out how I was gonna get there. This is the closest, right? So less time, right? So I kept applying there. It took me a whole entire month and a half to get a job there. Every single day I would call them. So I remember one time, the first time I called them, like, hey, I just put my application in. My name's Merrick. I really want to, I just want you guys to take a look at it. And I remember the manager, his name was Jordan, and he was like, oh yeah, I'll take a look. I'll put a sticky note on my, my mirror to, look at your application. I waited 2 days. And I didn't hear anything about that. 2 days later, I call him again. Hey, it's Merrick. I just put in my application at Wendy's. When can I start working? Can I get an interview going? He's like, oh yeah. Oh, I remember you. Yeah, I'm gonna put your name on the sticky note, right? I did that basically every other day for a month and a half, and it got to the point where I always call them at the exact same time, like at 3 p.m. And I knew basically by the time I even got that job at Wendy's, I knew the manager, the assistant manager, and a whole bunch of other employees, because they'd pick up the phone. Someone wasn't there, And I got to the point where I think I just annoyed the living crap out of him to where I got the job, and that's the only job I really could apply to, because if I didn't get Wendy's, I would have to travel another 2 miles to get for Subway or something like that. So that was the closest one. So for a month and a half, I was always calling. I was always just like, I'm going to get this. I was hungry, And remember the day I got the orientation, I was about to call him exactly at 3 p.m. and I got a call at 2:58, and I'm like, and I pick it up, like, hello, and it's Jordan saying, hey, Merrick, that's crazy. I was just, he's like, I was expecting you to call me earlier, and then we just laughed, and next thing you know, he's like, yeah, your orientation is this Saturday. Can you come in at 9:30? I'm like, yes, I can, and then he's like, all right. And I remember that, I told my parents about it. They're all happy, and I'm like, Dad, I'm like, I got a job. He's like, great. And I'm like, can you drive me there, right? Can you do I have some type of mode of transportation? And he said, figure it out yourself. He did. And I'm like, okay, that's okay, I thought they were gonna drop me off, right? Or do something, and it got to the point where I was like, there's no bus routes going to it, it was just like, how am I gonna get there, And know what I realized? God gave me 2 legs, right? So I walked there. I remember the day of the orientation, it was raining, and I had to put something, formal, right? I want to look good. And it was raining, and here I am walking 3 miles to a Wendy's on the side of the fucking highway to my orientation. And by the time I get there, right, I leave like 2.5 hours earlier because, I didn't know the distance, and that's actually how long it took. I got there, and I'm drenched in water. Everything's just, I'm just drenched in freaking water. All my hair was messed up. The nice shirt I had, the slacks, the shoes were drenched in water, and I'm like, and I went to the bathroom. I grabbed a whole bunch of paper towels. I was patting them on my head, trying to dry myself, and I realized like, okay, I got 2 more minutes before the orientation. I go outside and I see Jordan's face. He's like, he's looking. He's like, yeah, he's like, did something spill on you, And I told him, I had to walk here for 3 miles, and he's like, all right, he's like, as long as you can get here on time, I'll give you the job. And that was it. And then every single day ever since that, I haven't been a day late. I had never called out, by the way. Even when I was sick, I always worked there. And so I'd always travel. I started walking, right? And I realized it was taking forever. So I started jogging, right? And then I got to a point where I could start, like run the whole entire way. And then once I started making money at Wendy's, I invested and I bought a bike myself. And it was like $250. And I'm like, all right, well, biking actually increases your speed, from me to get to Wendy's by 60%. So I get to save 60% more time, right? It means I can leave later, right? Meaning that I can travel faster, less cardio, and it was awesome. And then after a couple more years, right, of doing schoolwork, all these AP classes, homework and stuff, I bought my first car, all by my own. My dad told me for my 18th birthday, he's like, Merrick, we see that you're doing good, I want to pay half for your first car. And I was like, no, like, Dad, like, you put a roof over my head, you gave me, you paid for vacations for us, you done all this, food in my belly, like, you don't owe anything to me, right? And he kind of got mad, he was like, I can see why, right? But at that point, I was independent. I was already just locked in. And I remember I bought my first Ford Focus 2003, and it was a red one. It was like $4,000, and I bought it all on my own. And I remember for driver ed class, I bought that all on my own, by the way, too. I asked my mom about it. I'm like, hey, can you sign me up? She's like, you have a computer, right? And I'm like, wow, it taught me how to be, I bought that thing on my own, I remember when I was sitting at this driver ed class, I see everyone just, there, wearing regular attire, and here I am coming in wearing a bike helmet because I had a bike there, and I'm all sweating and stuff for like 20 minutes straight, in the beginning, to like cool off. Like, and then after that, I would have to go to my Wendy's job, and I would have to travel another like 2 miles on my bike. I was like that. I remember on the first day on my 18th birthday, I opened up my traditional IRA account on Fidelity, and I invested in my first stock ever, and that was Wendy's. Yep, it was Wendy's. And because I was like, all right, well, if I work really hard at Wendy's, if I pack, if I make the burgers really quick, and bag up the 4-for-4 deals and biggie bags and like all this crazy stuff really fast, the Wendy's stock is just going to surge up, right? And I'm going to be rich. Well, little did I know that's not actually how stocks work, I thought that I could work really hard and the stock would soar. No, right? I think after holding on to the Wendy stock for a year, I made like $2 in total. So, lesson learned, right? I was kind of stupid with that, And, my dad, I'm very thankful for my dad. He literally he got all that stuff embezzled in my mind to be independent, I remember when I was 16, after I got my job, he was talking about stocks and stuff, and I asked him about it. And I remember he put off the side of the road because we got in a really, really good conversation about it, and he taught me everything about what a stock is. It's a share of a company that technically you're an owner, he talked to me liquid, he talked to me about the volume, he talked about day trading, options, he talked everything about it, and I had good grasp. And then when I was bored, I'd look up kind of information about it, right? So it was crazy, man. And so once I started getting into stocks, right, around I was 18, I was vesting into Wendy's and stuff. I was like, I need to make more, right? So I dove into, options. If you guys don't know what options are, definitely do your research on like theta decay. If you don't even know what theta decay or all the Greeks, you need to do your research. So basically, I was doing naked call options on Robinhood. I was like, I hate working at Wendy's. I was like, I'm going to get rich, right? You know what I'm saying? So I remember I would just, I would spend like $1,000 a week in my savings, investing in naked call options. I remember my first trade, I made like $200 from like $500, and I'm like, oh, I'm gonna be rich. I know what it is, right? Everyone makes money on their first trade. Maybe their first, second, third trade, even fourth. But it's all about consistency. Can you keep doing that, over time, right? And even when you have like bad days, and I didn't. After my second, I think I made money on my second trade, and on my third trade, I was like, oh, this is so easy. I'm just gonna buy another naked call option. Ford's earnings are tomorrow. It's obviously gonna go up, right? Yeah, and that's when I lost $1,000. I lost basically all my profit and stuff, and I was in the negative. And I'm like, that was a big learning lesson. So you know what I did? I invested more into call options. It got to the point where I lost over $8,000 in options. And so I lost $8,000 in my own money, and then that's when I realized I need to quit, right? That's when I was greedy, and I was just basically just, that's when, and I learned that, and I was 18. I know every night, when I worked night shift or night crew, I would mop like the floors of Wendy's, and I would have like YouTube videos talking about what spreadsheets are. There's iron condors, there's the butterfly, all these weird different spreads you could do on options, so it's more safer. And I learned that, and I did make my money. I made like $2,000 off that, but then I lost. I get more of it, and so yeah, it's just I learned my lesson about that, right? And I realized that I don't want to just gamble like that, So I dived into the realm of YouTube. I was a really funny guy. I loved being funny. I loved being, so I created a YouTube channel, and I did skits. I will actually, I don't know if I can link it or, but it's called Merpuffity. Basically, I used to perform long form content videos like Long Beach Griffey, Caleb City, like all those guys who do skits and stuff. And I used to basically kind of like, every time they posted, I would have a tracker on my phone and a calendar. Like I knew when they posted and what time. So right when they posted, I'd go into the comments, the YouTube section, and I'd be like, hey guys, I just posted my YouTube video. I do skits just like these guys. Can you check it out? I basically self-promoted myself in the YouTube chat and in the comments, and it worked. I was getting like, I think on one video I got like 10, 11k views, and I got a whole bunch of subs. I went from 0 to 6k subs, and I'm like, oh, I'm made out of the trenches, right? And then everything was kind of going well with that. And then after that, I found a new job. I was working at Target. Then I got fired because I just said I can't do this anymore. And then I worked at a medical facility, and I was a patient transporter. And I remember I was just like, this is just, it's ass, right? And so here I am making skits on the side, making no money. I'm in college, all right? Paying for, I was trying to become a doctor, right? So I'm paying for college classes. I'm taking art, and all this stupid electives, and I'm paying thousands of dollars each semester to do this. And I'm like, my parents didn't pay anything. They pay for my college. They pay for my car. They didn't really, I grew up independent. Everything I had was on my own. And so it was, I remember I was working night shift as a patient transport. I was on top of the hospital, and I saw like the sunset, and it just hit me. And I'm like, why do I want to be a doctor? And I'm like, I don't, like, yeah, it's cool helping people, but I was in it for the money. I'm like, oh my gosh, doctors make $300,000, like I want to be just like them, like the prestigious title, and that's, kind of the reason why. It wasn't really because I wanted to help people, it's because I wanted to it was for the money, to be honest. And, and that's why I was starting, I was always doing something, YouTube, stocks, options, and, during that time, I remember, I think a couple days after that realization, I came back home from like one evening, and I walked into my living room, and I saw my dad and my mom pissed. They were just looking at me, and I'm like, uh-oh, what do I do now, right? And I remember they told me, they're like, come up to the dining room table, right? And here they are, and they found my YouTube channel. And on my YouTube channel, I was doing like skits like dads be like, moms be like, kind of like they make relatable content. And then my mom and dad took offense to that because they thought I was mocking him, but in reality I wasn't, and I don't blame them for thinking about that, they weren't okay with me filming inside. They're like, well, we have creepy people on the internet. What, they know everything, all our furniture, they know a desk. And I'm like, kind of stuff like that, right? And they, they're kind of new to the realm of social media, right? And, you know, I don't blame them. They're like, why are you doing this? I'm like, I told them, like, you know, I want to make content, you know, and then my dad's like, you're not funny, you know, this is just disrespectful. You're not going to make money off it, you know, like, you know, my parents were oblivious to the fact that you can make money online, right? And during that time, I wasn't making any money on YouTube. So, you know, my dad was kind of valid on that, right? Let's imagine, like, you know, you're a parent and your kids come home and they tell you they want to be a SoundCloud rapper, you know, kind of like the same thing that my parents kind of thought, right? And I remember, like, my dad was pissed, you know, and he was just like, you know, it was also the cringe from the YouTube content too, that I was just like, oh man, like, they're gonna, like, every time I post, like, you know, they're gonna see it and they're not gonna like it, you know, and I'm just like, I was like, all right, this is, I can't live like this. And so I remember I told him, my dad told me, he's like, all right, you can either keep working on college, right, keep doing your thing, you know, and just quit posting videos and stop, you know, or you get out of my house. And that right there changed my life. That changed everything. And I realized, I'm like, what makes me happy, right? What makes me happy in that, you know, it's a question of like, what makes you happy and what are you going to be good at to build yourself? You know, what do you think you can make money? What do you think you can do to achieve the lifestyle that you want to live? And I didn't want to live a lifestyle where I was stuck in traffic for an hour trying to go to, you know, Seattle, work at a hospital, come back, you know, be dealing with patients. Like, that's not the lifestyle I didn't want to live. And I'd rather work on something new, you know, even though it made me no money, onto the lifestyle that I want. And that's when I realized that, what am I doing, right? Well, I'm paying thousands of dollars for something I don't want to do. And so I remember I just looked at my dad and I'm like, all right. And I stood up and I grabbed as much stuff. I shoved it in the back of my car and I drove. I drove to the nearest McDonald's because I always get this meal. I always get 2 double cheeseburgers, a medium fry, 4-piece, and a medium like Dr. Pepper. And that's kind of like, I just went there because it was like, you know, kind of just order food, you know, get something in my stomach, you know, just kind of process what the fuck just happened, right? And then, you know, I have no place to live. I just drove to McDonald's after shoving all my belongings, personal stuff in my car. You know, on my phone, I dropped out of college right there, and then I just quit. I know I got some of my money back, you know, and I just dropped out of college, and here I am in the middle of a fucking parking lot, you know, eating my food, thinking, what the fuck am I gonna do now, you know? And I'm like, well, I can't put an application in, right? I don't have a credit score. I don't have any of this stuff, right? So I can't get apartments. So what do? I went on Facebook Marketplace, where I found places you can live at. And there was this one place in Everett that was like 15 minutes away from me. And it would cost $600 to live a month. And I'm like, I can afford that, right? You know, I made like $3,000 in total that month from like my job. And I was like, I can do that, right? So I met up with her that same day. I called her desperately, you know, her name's Teresa. And, I lived with her. I lived with this old woman, and, you know, she kind of felt bad for the situation I was in. You know, I told her briefly what happened, and I remember, like, some mornings she would make me eggs and breakfast, you know, like, for free, and, you know, I'd always mow her grass and stuff, and she was awesome. She was a really cool person. And so I remember the first day, you know, moving into my new place, you know, the $600 bedroom, you know, that's all I had, you know, and I shared like the bathroom and laundry, everything else in the house with this person, you know. She was super old. I was depressed. All I had a green cot, you know, like a small little flat cot, and I put a pillow and a blanket, and then I had a giant suitcase, my luggage, just on the side of the room, and some cords for like my computer, my laptop. That's what it was. I remember waking up the next morning, and I was probably one of the most depressed states I've ever been. I was so depressed. I was like, you know, imagine you thinking that you're going to become a doctor, right? You have everything set. You did you studied your ass off to get the best, you know, all these good grades and stuff, right? And here you are, you know, in a shithole where you have to start all again, and everything you worked for was for nothing. And that was the mentality I had. Everything I've done for the last 18, 19 years, stocks, options, studying my ass off, getting really good grades, you know, wrestling, you know, varsity, you know, just down the drain. And I'm like, I had to start brand new, and here I am living like a fucking, you know, I was basically home, you know, borderline poor, you know, like a homeless shit, you know. And I was depressed, man. That was the worst probably place I've ever been. But then I realized I could film as much content as I want on YouTube, even though I wasn't getting paid off it, right? So I would go to work, right, for the next, and I manned the fuck up, you know. I was very careful on my bills, And I remember the second month, I was super low on bills to the point where I couldn't even afford groceries. So I remember I remember going to churches on Sundays because that's where they give away free food. And some of it's expired, by the way. So I remember I would go there and I would, get my food from the church because I didn't have my groceries from first because I didn't have enough money. And I remember a lot of times I'd see like my friends and people I went to school with volunteering, they gave out the homeless people and stuff. And here they are, I'm with the homeless people and they're just looking at me. They had like this disgusted voice, like this look they have this look on their face. I was completely changed. I was sunken eyes, I was deprived. I looked horrible and they could see it and they could I know there was no emotion in my face at all. I didn't have any thought. The only thing in my mind was just to survive, and I was like 18 when this happened. Right. So, man, it sucked, man. And I remember a lot of them actually unfollowed me on Instagram, Snapchat. Like, that's where I realized they were my friends anyway. They realized that, I lived like this and they're like, what the hell? They thought I was doing drugs or something like that, right? And it's easy to, kind of view someone, without knowing a lot about them, right? So that sucked. And the place I was staying at didn't have Wi-Fi. And the signal there was horrible. You could barely do anything on your phone, And so I had to film my skits there, right? Quietly as much as possible because I didn't want to bug my landowner I was living with, right? Teresa. And then I had to travel to Panera, like the bread place, and because they had free Wi-Fi. And so I would work, film skits, and I would race to a Panera and, upload my stuff there and travel back, That's what I did. And it got to the point where, I know what to do. And I only had like $400 in total. And I remember I bought this guy's course on how to make money online and stuff. The kind of like SEO, how to brand yourself and all that. And his name was Ray Mack. And I bought his course for like $300. That means I was left with $100 in my account. Like, I don't know what I was thinking during that time, but I was like, I need to weigh out. So I bought his course. And then every single day after Panera, at work, I would travel to Panera and I would get on a call with him on my laptop and I would call for hours, talking about the situation I was in and stuff. And he said that I needed to make short form content instead of long form content, because shorts, and TikTok were kind of still a brand new thing, and he's like, you need to get early to that. And so I remember I posted a whole bunch of like short form content, YouTube videos. And it started picking up, right? And then after 2-3 months of living like that, I wasn't getting paid and I didn't believe in myself, I was getting like, maybe like 10K views a month, and that's when I gave up. And I realized I can't live like this, and so you know what I did? My friend convinced me, and myself partially, I joined the Navy. So I remember I went to the recruiting office and I said, "Hey, I want to find a way out." Right? I didn't believe in myself, and this is one of the biggest. I'm not gonna lie, it's kind of one of the biggest regrets I have. But I'm still glad I did the Navy because I wouldn't go back and change anything. And I remember, sitting in the recruiting office, and I had this gut feeling like this is, I don't know, right? But I just sucked it up, right? And then I signed up for the Navy, signed my contract with the MEPS, and they said, all right, on July 7th, you're going to ship out to boot camp, right? And that was like in 3 months from now, right? So here I am, I have to survive for another 3 months, I keep doing my YouTube stuff, and then, this makes me so mad. The same day, all right? The same day that I show up at the recruiter's office on July 7th so they can fly me to boot camp, my YouTube blew up. I went from having 7K followers to getting over 50,000 followers within a matter of a week. Like it was that fast. All my videos blew up, and here I am boarding the plane, going to boot camp, and I'm like, oh my God, I see YouTube sending me notifications saying, hey, you meet the criteria for shorts. And I remember they had a paycheck and it was like $2,000, $3,000 that I could claim. And I had 1 month to claim it, right? And I'm like, I'm trying to fill it out as much as possible. Like we land and stuff. And I remember like, next thing you know, I only have like 20 minutes because after I landed, the recruiter took me to a bus and I'm off and I'm going to boot camp and I'm trying to fill out this information, and I couldn't because they have to mail something to your address. You have to confirm it. So I lost on $2,000, $3,000. And then I remember I arrived at boot camp, you know, and they said, everyone turn off your phone and put it in like this black bag, you know, and you're not going to have it for 2.5 months because you're going to be in training, right? You don't have your phone when you're in basic, boot camp. And that was like the worst fucking feeling I've ever felt. Everything I've worked for and endured and survived and what I had to do to get to that point, all down the fucking drain. Here we are again, all down the fucking drain. Like, it was just, it was like the cycle was just repeating. Like, you know, again, it's just like I've been in this scenario again, and just, it felt horrible. I felt depressed, you know, and I was just like, it was the worst thing ever, you know. And, you know, 10 minutes later, after riding to boot camp, they're shaving my head. I don't have access to my phone. My YouTube's blown off, and here I am, where I can't check my phone or any type of social media for 2.5 months. Worst feeling ever. But that's what I signed up for, right? You know, so I get done, you know, boot camp. I immediately, the day after graduating, I check my phone, you know, I see I have 50,000 followers, you know, and everything was dead. My thing just was, you know, blown up. And then after that, people were waiting for my new content, and I just didn't post, right? And my channel died. I kept trying to revive it. It went nowhere at all. And that was the worst feeling ever. And then after that, I went through training, right? I was an ET, electronic technician in the Navy, and I did all this electrical stuff, and I went through training. My training was about 6 months, 8 months, and during that time, I was still filming, right? You know, and that's where I realized my YouTube channel was just dead. So I created a new one called Merrick Ideas. And that's where I did like top 10 facts. And that shit blew up on TikTok. And that's when I made my first like money on social media. It took me a year and a half. It took me about 2 years of grinding on YouTube, you know, to make my first money on YouTube and also on TikTok, right? 2 years. And it probably would have been sooner if some things weren't, you know, in the way, right? It was a great feeling, right? And then after that, I dived in. I tried to get into NFTs. That failed horribly. I tried getting into AI OnlyFans. That failed horribly, you know. And then so I kept posting, right? And eventually I got invited to this program called TTCC where you can make ads. And I joined it, and I realized that, you know, I made this quick ad for this one company, Mega Mansion, like a mobile game. And a couple days later, I check my phone and I see I made $50. Keep in mind, the YouTube was setting me about $100 a month for my content, you know, for shorts. And I made $50 off this ad that took me 15 minutes. I was like, what the crap? I was flipping out because I could join like 10, 20 of these ads each week, right? You know, and that $50 was just like, you can make anywhere from 1 cent to like thousands of dollars on each ad. So I remember the first month I made $1,000, the most money I've ever made on social media. On ads or some, you know, social media, right? And then the second month I made 4,000, 5,000, you know, and, you know, this is when I was going through training, you know. Then I was sent to C school, in San Diego for more training, right? And my ads were blowing up, you know. I was making really good money, 7, 8K. And then the Navy was like, you're going to go ahead and go on a deployment. And I'm like, what's that? He's like, well, you're going to be on a boat in the middle of the ocean with no phone, no service, nothing, right? Well, like, you have a phone, but you don't have signal, right? And so I was like, well, who's going to do ads, right? I'm thinking in my mind, well, like, who's going to, you know, keep making ads, right? You know, like, I can't upload ads. I can't make anything, you know? And I realized, I'm like, everything down the drain. All that was just down the drain. I remember it was a cool experience. I remember, you know, the Navy was awesome. I went to a whole bunch of different countries, had met the most amazing people. But here I am again. Everything was down the fucking drain. Everything was just down the drain. I worked really hard to get where I'm at, and then I had to go on deployment for 6 to 7 months. You know, and by the time I came back, the program basically like just was oversaturated. It wasn't good, like, you know, and I had to grind my ass off to, you know, while I was in the Navy, right? And also, you know, so a couple years later after that, I served my time, and then I got discharged, and then basically, you know, here I am. I'm like, all right, finally, there's no more fuck ups. Nothing can fuck me up now, right? And that was true. I didn't have any more fucking, I knew I failed so many damn times that it was so easy to rebuild myself up. You know, like, I was so used to just being on the bottom that it was so easy for me to figure something out, right? And so when I got discharged in the Navy, I was like, all right, I need to make money, right? You know, I didn't have a job, right? You know, or anything like that. So I kept doing ads. There was a new program on TikTok that kind of was doing ads, and I joined that. And I built an agency out of it because I already knew kind of from background what ads were doing. I did it myself. I remember the first month I made like 5, 6K, and then I started scaling. I started seeing 7K months, 8K months, 12K, 13, 20K, and all the way up to 30, 40K. And that was the most craziest time of my life. And then now it's freaking awesome. And I don't know. I'm just very blessed, I guess, very grateful of where I am today. The amount of bullshit I had to get to, the amount of bullshit that I've had to do to get where I'm at today is just, it's insane. I had to be homeless. I was kicked out, and I joined the military. Lost a lot of money to options. I got scammed a lot. The business model I was doing. There's a lot of just crazy stuff. And then I also have a failed business, by the way, too. It's called Fuse Trend. I was doing that real estate stuff with my partner in Czech Republic, who's doing real estate stuff. And basically we contact real estate agents. We're like, hey, we can edit your videos really well. I created LC. Everything, the operation itself cost me like $600. And that was just, 4 or 5 months of straight, cold calling people, and it went nowhere, right? It was hard, sales calls with real estate agents are like brutal because they know about that stuff. So I learned a lot about sales during that time too. So, and that was a failure too. So that, I've had so many damn failures, but as long as you learn from each one, you'll be fine. And so I started, realizing what I need to do, and that's how I am today. And now I can basically wake up and create my own schedule, which is nice. I just got done with the hike with my friends, my roommates here, and it's awesome, I can this is the lifestyle that I want, where I can make my own schedule, and it's freaking amazing. And I can travel. 6 months ago, I was in Europe. Like, I was traveling, I spent like 2.5 weeks over there. I went to Palm Springs, with my parents to see them, like, it's awesome, It feels good when you can meet up with your parents, right? You take them out to eat and you pay for the meal. The moment I started making money online, right, I think my parents in the last 3 years have only paid for like 3 meals in total, like going out. Everything else I've always bought, I always bought their meals. I always paid for the meal. I always did everything that, because, I was just independent, and, I'm glad my dad raised me like this, So it was just, it's just crazy stuff. I don't know how to explain. I've lived a crazy life, and, finally here I am, I'm branding myself out now. I want to kind of show like the possibilities of how you can make money, especially doing ads. You can literally film yourself doing an intro, you do your skit, and then you just talk about the ad, and you can make thousands of dollars off that. I did an ad for Microsoft. I've done over probably 10,000 ads easily in my life. So 10,000. I know everything about ads. I can go anything, it's crazy. And right now there's a program on TikTok called TTO, and it's basically the same thing. And it's really early. Nobody knows about it, and here I am, with all the ad knowledge. I'm like, oh, this is easy, I finally, I don't know. I think God's finally giving me a break now. I don't know. Some being out there is finally giving me a break, and thank you. And I thank them very much, because, I'm so tired of just being on the bottom, right? We're always constantly having to restart stuff, but I've learned so many life lessons, and I'm 23 years old too. I'm gonna turn 24 this year, and a lot of people are amazed, because I lived a crazy life, at 23 years old, I'm a veteran, I'm a college dropout, I was kicked out of my house, and here I am making money on like doing ads, right? So it's crazy. I lived all at the age of 23, right? So, I'm not gonna stop, and I'm glad I can share my story with you guys. There's a lot of more juicy other stuff in there too. I probably forgot to mention stuff, but that's kind of it, I couldn't be more grateful for my friends, for people who have supported me, and like I said, I just got started. I just got started. I'm gonna be. I know for a fact, for the certainty, I'm gonna be easily making over 100K a month. Like, I can say that with certainty. Like, I realized the potential I had. For the longest time, I didn't believe in myself. I thought that, I'm stuck at making, 5K, like, I didn't believe in myself for the longest time, because every time I believed in myself, someone would bring me down or I'd have to restart everything, and that's why that's why I didn't get in the concept of, not believing in myself, because, something bad always happens. But then I realized, if you don't join, like, the military off of impulse, and get kicked out, and all this stupid stuff, right? But man, what a crazy life I've lived, right? And I'm just beginning. So I failed so many damn times in life, and I'm done failing now. I've learned so many damn mistakes, and hopefully from this video right here, you guys learn, a couple things, right? Don't join the Navy or the military, right? Unless it's your plan Z. Your plan Z. Go for a trade. Go for anything. Like, that will limit you. It really will. But at the same time, though, or maybe if you want to follow your father's footsteps, or something like that, then do it. I'm very patriotic. I'm very glad to serve the country and stuff. So just kind of be very careful before you sign that contract, because it's a lot, But at the same time, though, you meet amazing people. Yeah, and then I think another thing is believe in yourself. If you can just believe in yourself, manifest, you'll be fine. You got this, all right? And then and I think another big thing is that every time you fail, learn something from it, all right? I didn't, that happened when I was doing option trading stocks, I didn't learn from my mistakes. That's why I kept losing money, right? So learn from every time you make a mistake. Just write down, get a piece of paper and write down what you need to improve on. And I guarantee you, you probably won't make that mistake again. And it helps you so much, all right? All right. My name is Merrick Hoffman. I'm a veteran of the United States military. I'm a dropout college student. I got kicked out from my house. And now I'm making ads for a living. Thank you guys for watching.